The Holy Gospel is from John chapter 4. Jesus calls a Samaritan woman to faith, providing the living water that she desperately needs. As he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph, Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews did not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go, call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the Spirit and in truth." The woman said, "I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I, the one speaking to you, I am he." The Gospel of the Lord. During the season of Lent, we are confronted with our greatest needs and the things that we really truly need most in life, and we get to think about where we would be if we didn't have Christ meeting those greatest needs. And so each Sunday during Lent, we're looking at one of these things that Christ gives that gives us exactly what we need. Today we'll be looking at John chapter 4, and we get to see that Jesus gives me exactly what I need. Jesus gives you exactly what you need. He gives us this living water. There's a form of diabetes called diabetes insipidus. Ever heard of it? It sounds pretty bad, though, doesn't it? And it is bad. If somebody has diabetes insipidus, they take a glass of water, they drink the whole thing, and they think, my mouth is still a little bit dry. Put it down. They grab another glass of water, and they drink the whole thing, and they down the whole thing, and they think, still kind of thirsty. They drink a third glass of water, and maybe they go run to the restroom, they come back, I'm still thirsty. They drink gallons and gallons and gallons of water, and they literally have unquenchable thirst. If you have diabetes insipidus, you just stay thirsty, and your body just pushes all of the water out. How would you fare with something like that? It sounds kind of like a horrible way to live, not necessarily insipidus, whatever that is, but insidious, an insidious disease. And I think that picture, it's a sobering picture of where we would be if we didn't have this living water that comes from Christ. Every single person has a spiritual thirst that needs to be met. And our bodies are always crying out, and our souls are always crying out for more. And if we aren't drinking of the living water that comes from God and comes from Christ, we're going to fill up those cups in some other way. You're going to pour the earthly relationships that you have and drink from that. You're going to pour the money that you have and you drink from that. You're going to pour this earthly contentment that you have and drink from that and try to fill up this spiritual thirst and to quench it with these earthly means. And maybe if those things aren't working for you, you might come at this in a little bit of a different way, and you might start to fill up that cup in a way that says, everybody else has that stuff, but it's probably not that good anyway, and you fill it up with like sour grapes. Or you fill it up with a whole bunch of complaining to think, this stuff in the world just hasn't sufficed. You felt this, where you try to go to an earthly well to fill up your bucket with this dead water, and it's just never enough. It's a spiritual thirst that can't be quenched. Today, as we get to look at John chapter 4, we get to see as Jesus comes to a Samaritan woman at a well, he identifies her greatest need, that she has this thirst where she keeps going back and has this pattern again and again, and it needs to be quenched in another way, in a better way. Today, what we get to see is Jesus comes to this woman and to us, giving us exactly what we need, living water. Just one verse before the sermon text for today, John tells us what's going on in Jesus' ministry. He says this, it was right before the story that I read. John said that Jesus had to go through Samaria. Now, geographically, Jesus didn't have to go through Samaria. He could have gone around. In fact, this was the common path that Jews would take. Jews and Samaritans, they just really didn't get along. So Jesus could have gone around Samaria, but John puts it this way, that he had to go. Imagine a firefighter standing outside of a burning house, and the firefighter hears the screams from inside. The firefighter really does have two options. He can turn around the other way, and he can hang up his boots, and he can say, it'd be a little bit safer for me and better for me just to go home right now. But any moral and any good firefighter is going to hear those screams and is going to rush in and is going to think, I have one option. My only option is I have to go into that burning building and I have to save. Imagine Jesus standing at the border of Samaria, and there's a sign there and it says, Jews this way, Samaritans right through. For Jesus, he didn't have two options. He could hear the screaming souls who were thirsty. Not just this Samaritan woman, but that entire village. The story goes on, and at the end, the whole village comes out, and they have to see and speak to Jesus and hear what he has. Jesus knew that there were thirsty souls there in Samaria. He had to go. Jesus and his disciples, they're going through Samaria, and they're tired, and Jesus stops at a well, and his disciples go on to find some food. And as Jesus is sitting there, a woman comes out to him, a Samaritan woman, and it's about noon, and she comes to draw water. There's a couple of things that are shocking and surprising about this. One, that she would come at noon during the heat of the day, and another, that she would come seemingly all alone. There's another time in the Old Testament when a woman goes to draw water. It's in Genesis chapter 24, and it's Rebekah. And Moses tells us in that moment that it was at evening when women would go and draw water. This would be the common time to go when it's the cool of the day, and it's a little bit easier because you're not sweating, and go with a group of people so that you're safe. It seems like it's kind of a shocking thing that this woman comes seemingly all alone, most likely right there in the middle of the day, in the heat of the day. It suggests that she's isolated in some way, that she's done something that's kind of kept her at arm's distance. But there's something even more shocking about this, the fact that when she gets there, Jesus speaks to her. He says to her, woman, give me something to drink. This is a shocking thing, and she recognizes it because Jews and Samaritans, they just don't associate with each other. But also for a man to speak to a woman openly in a public place, this was shocking. Jesus didn't just have to go through Samaria, he had to speak with this woman. He knew that she was a thirsting soul who needed this living water that he could give. They start this conversation, and they kind of start speaking past each other. Jesus says this to her, if you knew the gift of God, he would have given you living water. Or another way to put this, if you knew the gift of God, he would have given you water, the living kind. Or what Jesus is getting at, or at least the picture here is, if you knew the gift of God, he would have given you water, the rushing kind, the fresh kind. This is the way that phrase, living water, most likely would have hit for this Samaritan woman, that there's this water, and you can either have stagnant water that's just sitting, or water that's rushing and water that's moving. You could have this water that's deep down in the well. If you pull it up, it's got kind of brown and kind of murky. And if you've ever drank well water, it sort of tastes a little bit like iron, maybe water like that. Or rushing, living water from a stream. Jesus, of course, is talking about salvation, but the way that this hits the Samaritan woman, she's thinking a little bit differently, especially after Jesus explains a little bit, and he says, this living water, if you drink of it, you'll never be thirsty again, and she wants it. She replies to him, Sir, give me this water so I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here. Almost as if she's saying, Jesus, do you know of a place where I can go where it's a shallow spring and I won't have to put the bucket all the way down? Or do you know a stream where it's close to where I live so that I won't ever have to be thirsty again? She's not quite getting it. Jesus is speaking about salvation, and she's thinking about plumbing. So Jesus has to go just a little bit further. He asks her, he tells her this, he says, well, go, call your husband and come back. And this is where the master teacher is about to diagnose her heart. He's about to make sure that she understands that he's talking about salvation, not a practicality. She replies and says, well, I have no husband. But Jesus knows her. He knows everything that she's ever done. And he exposes her and diagnoses her. He says, you are right. You've had 5 husbands. And the man you now have is not your husband. Let's pause here and we could diagnose this woman for a moment. 5 husbands. That means 5 divorces. And sure, maybe she married 5 deadbeat guys and they didn't treat her very well, but anytime that there's divorce, there's sin on both sides. And now a 6th time, with somebody, she's living with him as if this is her husband, but he's not. Adultery, right? Yeah, not too hard to diagnose the sin. But maybe we'd be wrong. I wonder if the reason that Jesus brought this up is because he's exposing a pattern in her life. That now it's the 6th time that she keeps going back to that same earthly well to draw up something, and she's hoping that it's going to fill this spiritual thirst inside her heart and in her soul. It's 6 times that she keeps going back to this same exact sin, and it hasn't satisfied 5 times before, will it this time? Oh, we thought it was so easy to diagnose her heart. Well, now it's time to diagnose your own. I think the sin that this text exposes is this pattern that we build in our own lives. To keep going back to these same earthly wells and to put our bucket down and to try to pull up this like dead, murky water. Maybe it is that bucket of relationships. Now, water is good. It quenches your thirst. We need it. And the relationships you have, they're good. They're great gifts of God. But if you're going back to that earthly bucket and you think that the relationships you have in your family, your children, your parents, if you think that that relationship is going to somehow be better and more fulfilling than the relationship you can have with Christ and the one that God gives you, then you're treating this good thing as this earthly water, and it can never fully satisfy. Or maybe you go and you lower your bucket into the well and you pull up this earthly water, and it's the money and the security that you've gained for yourself here in this life. Well, you know if you've tried that money is not going to buy you happiness, and it's not going to give you that true security, but we keep doing it, lowering our bucket into that well, letting it consume our lives. Or maybe you put that bucket down into that earthly well, and you keep pulling back up those same exact things, that same pattern that we get into to try to drink from an earthly well rather than to drink of the living water that comes from Christ. Yeah, if you really start to diagnose your heart and let Jesus speak to you, what would he say to you if you showed up to him at that well on that day? Go, call your family and come back. Go, bring your money and come back. Go, bring this sinful pattern that you have and come back. Yeah, maybe we're not so different from her after all. You know, when some sin gets exposed in your heart, what's our first inclination? Our first inclination is to distract. Maybe try to change the conversation. And something like that is happening in this conversation that Jesus has with this woman. She says to Jesus, she says, well, we worship on a mountain here in Samaria, and you Jews say that we should worship in Jerusalem. She enters into like a theological debate almost. And isn't it so much easier to do that when your heart gets exposed, to start to debate with the person there? But Jesus, the master teacher, he's going to make sure that he brings the point right back because he knows that he has to give her exactly what she needs, living water. And so he brings it back by explaining to her. He says, okay, a time is coming, and it has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth. Jesus is reminding her that geography is neither here nor there. At this moment, what we need is worshiping the Father in spirit and in truth. And she knows something about this, and she says back to Jesus, she says, well, I know that the Messiah is coming, and when he comes, he will explain everything to us. For her, it's a moment far off in the future. It's a moment that's coming, and she's waiting. But Jesus says, I'll bring this right back to you, right in front of you, and give you exactly what you need, as Jesus says to her, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. This is exactly what she needed. She needed that Messiah to be right in front of her and tell her everything that she had ever done. The great thing about this text and this story is that nothing has changed about this woman. She hasn't dropped everything and ran back into town and completely changed her life. She's the exact same Samaritan woman who has had 5 husbands, and the man she's with is still not her husband, and yet Jesus stands in front of her and he says, I'm the one you need. In the reading from Romans chapter 5, at the very end of it, the Apostle Paul said this, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. While you were continuing to go back to that earthly well and to pull up this bucket of dead water, while you were still in your sin, Christ came and died for you. Think of that story from Exodus chapter 17, how the Israelites were grumbling against Moses and God, and Moses went to God, and while they were still grumblers, God gave them exactly what they needed, water from a rock in the wilderness. While you and I are still in our sin, Christ came and died for you. This is the great gift. That the story, in and of itself, it's not about our transformation at first. It's about God, about Jesus coming and giving us exactly what we need. Himself, living water. Just on Wednesday, we got to read the story of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. You remember what the content of that prayer was? Jesus is praying to God the Father, and he says, if it's possible, may this cup be taken from me. And he was talking about everything that he was going to have to do, that he'd be betrayed, and he'd have to stand trial and suffer and die. And he's praying to God the Father, if there's anybody else who could possibly drink that cup. But then he prays, Father, not my will, but yours be done. Jesus went to the cross and he drank the cup that you and I can't drink. I wonder if one of the reasons that there is this spiritual thirst inside of everybody is everyone recognizes that there is something that needs to be done to be right with God, and we just can't do it. Instead, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us and gave you that living water. Do you remember when Jesus was hanging on the cross? Some of the words that he said? He had his arms stretched out right before he died, and he said, I thirst. Took a sponge, and they put it to his lips, and he drank some of that nasty, dead water, just so that he could be strengthened enough to say the words that matter. It is finished. In your Savior Jesus, who stands in front of you today, he says, I, the one you are speaking to, am he. The one who can give you that living water, drink from it, and never thirst again. You know, we didn't get to read the entire story of this woman in John chapter 4, but the rest of the story is she leaves her bucket at the well, she rushes into town, And she says to everybody, "Come, see the man who told me everything that I ever did." And the whole town comes out to Jesus, and they speak to him, and the well is forgotten, and the bucket is just left right there. This story comes to us today, and let Jesus expose your heart. But then leave the bucket at the well. That living water flows out in our lives to others and in your life. Leave the bucket there at the well and receive the living water that comes from Jesus. Today, Jesus gives us exactly what I need: living water. Amen.